Welcome to another installment of the Interchain Developer Academy interview series. As you know, this is designed to give you some guidance, a bit of a map, a bit of a compass to figure out what to do after you graduate from the program. What does the ecosystem look like? What's the landscape? Who could you talk to? What could you be working on, or could you build on top of? So today, we're very blessed to have with us Thomas from the IBC team at IG. So we'll be able to dig a little bit more into IBC. And yeah, so without further ado, Thomas, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
All right, cool. Thank you, Elias. Yeah, first of all, thanks everyone for being here. Happy to see some people who were part of the first cohort. So my name is Thomas. I'm the IBC DevRels at IG or Interchain GmbH. Yeah, basically I started this job back in February, so now for 6 months. And yeah, I guess we'll get back to my background, but I was pretty inexperienced developer, I would say. So for me, it's really been like a learning journey as well, still ongoing. And I think this is like the common denominator. If you find a job in the space, you'll feel yourself learning all the time, which for me personally, like, is something I really, really like. And that was also what I had in mind when joining IG, was to kind of like help make that transition easier for developers or even non-developers who want to get into Web3 from Web2 or just from scratch, because it can be kind of a challenge, and I was very interested in helping to make that transition become easier.
Cool. What was your background before you got started on this?
So I would say I'm now 30. I had kind of a wild ride in my 20s, kind of looking what I wanted to do. So I first studied photonics engineering at uni, but actually at the end, when making my thesis, it kind of dawned on me that the academic world was not really where I wanted to go. So yeah, after having studied 5 years, that was not the greatest revelation to have. And then the next couple of years, I did a couple of jobs, part-time jobs, and experimented with some of the like hype technologies that were out there. So with virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and ultimately also blockchain, because of the more like I would say philosophy around blockchain and decentralization and aligning incentives mechanisms, etc. I was really drawn to that. But I didn't really have any coding experience. So at first I tried to get into the blockchain industry. I guess that was around 2018, from like a business perspective. But I also didn't like have an official business background. So I tried applying for some jobs back in Belgium, where I'm from, but had, no success with that at all. So then I kind of like changed from my radar. Did another job that was not really related to anything techy. But then end of 2019, I made the jump to move to Berlin to be closer to where blockchain happens. Had a little bit of a setback, obviously, because of the pandemic and all the events basically breaking down. But then I took the choice to do an online master's in blockchain technologies. That was one of the, I think, first master's programs in blockchain. Was 1 year. And quite interesting because it kind of gave me this accountability. I guess you guys know this when you're learning on your own. Being a self-taught developer can be a bit tricky if you don't have that accountability, which may be the reason why you followed this program. Finished that in end of 2021, and then actually applied. Looked at the different players who are also active in Berlin. And actually, my first choice was Interchain, and that turned out to be a hit.
Cool. I'm curious, like, why Interchain? Why something like Cosmos? Because obviously there is a huge amount of choice out there. There are a lot of companies in Berlin alone. So like, why Cosmos?
I actually have a cool anecdote which kind of explains my thinking. And it goes back to what I was saying in 2018 when I was looking around, I also had kind of like an idea of my own to like build something with blockchain. But I found it really hard to like, especially at that point, to like pick my ecosystem, because back at that time I already had like the idea, okay, Ethereum probably is not going to be like sustainable or viable. You know, the gas prices are already too high, but they do have like nice tooling. At least at that point, it was pretty much the only ecosystem that had any kind of tooling and educational tools. But I didn't really want to make a commitment to the Ethereum ecosystem. And then when I looked at other ecosystems, I just found it too much of like yeah, a risk to really invest my limited time and resources. And that's what I really like about interoperability is from the point of view as a developer, you build something in the language that you're comfortable with, in the ecosystem that you think is the most attractive, with the framework that you're comfortable with. And ultimately, interoperability will make sure that all of these ecosystems are kind of linked, and that makes it a lot less, or makes the threshold a lot less lower to start building, and not having to think of, oh, is my ecosystem ultimately going to be the one that is going to survive? If you have a multi-chain world, then yeah, that's not really a concern that you need to have at the beginning of building.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, I mean, I would think similarly. Back when we started, when I started, there was nothing around. There was only Ethereum. That was the only option for like programmable blockchain. So it's easy, but it comes with its difficulties, because that means then you have to make the step at some point, be like, okay, am I going to move on from this? Where am I going to move? What am I going to do? But I think ultimately it's a good, it's an important point. And I keep talking to I keep talking about this to projects and protocols and different people in different ecosystems, to be like, look, you have to explain really well why it is worth it to take the risk to learn this tech, because they're like, oh, we've got cool tech, every developer is going to love this. You're like, well, people make a choice with what they're going to do with their life, so need to make sure that you explain well what's there, and also that it is worth it. So yeah, that's a good point, and probably a good choice. We'll see.
Maybe one more thing, I mean, that's more or less the reason why I chose interoperability. And then I looked at different projects. Obviously, Cosmos and Parity, who are developing Polkadot, are present in Berlin. So there were two obvious choices. And then when I compared like the visions, it was clear for me that Cosmos was the one that that was closest to my heart, because we have this idea of like independent blockchains, application specific, and pretty much a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach from Polkadot, which you probably know it. Like you have the parachains with the para slots. You need a lot of investment just to get a slot, and then everything is pretty much laid out for you. Whereas in Cosmos, yeah, it's much more free. I think Billy Rennekamp uses this analogy of like the cathedral being Polkadot, and then the bazaar is Cosmos, which is a little bit more chaotic and yeah, ultimately like a bit more lively maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think there is always something about maybe some anti-fragility in there, because it's, it is much more lively. But yeah, we'll talk about that more. And I mean, also because the cathedral and the bazaar might become interoperable, right? But maybe let's begin. I mean, obviously, so everyone here should have has covered IBC, not in too much depth, but has covered IBC in the program. But maybe you can do like a quick what it is and how it works, just so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, there's always sometimes a bit of a challenge. First had my first presentation a couple of weeks ago on IBC. I really had to like make sure it stayed inside the 15 minutes. I would say like IBC is a general universal interoperability protocol. So the important thing there is that basically you can send any type of data across IBC. So it's not just tokens, but basically like any type of arbitrary data. It's also secure, which means that it's not like some other bridges where you just have a multi-sig that controls the bridge and verifies all transactions. It's really like a protocol where we have the light client implementation. Light client is essentially an algorithm that tracks the state of another blockchain, but in a lightweight and efficient way to make sure that we can check if really like the commitment or the receipt of a packet has been stored on the blockchain. And we have relayers who are responsible for transferring the packets between blockchains. But because of this light client algorithm, we don't actually need to trust the relayers, which I think is a really important aspect of IBC, which enhances the security and also makes it trust minimized.
Yeah. So maybe a little bit more into, because I think this is an important one, like the difference between bridges and IBC. Like the relays in detail, like how does this look like when, you know, if I want to become a relayer, how does that look like? What does the relayer actually do? And how does the whole setup differ in detail from the bridge?
So essentially, if you want to be a relayer, we have software for that. It requires you to have a full node. Well, it's not a strict requirement, but it is recommended to have a full node of each chain that you want to connect. Then you have access to some of the endpoints. You can query the packets that need to be sent. You can also query for proofs. And then you have the packets and the proofs that are being sent to the other chain. And then IBC can do its magic. So essentially, for a relayer, yeah, you just need to have those nodes. You need to set up the relayer software. Some teams, the main two implementations are Hermes and the Go relayer at this point. There's also the TypeScript relayer, which still works, but it's not being actively maintained. And I think Hermes is the choice right now for most like professional relayer operators. But I think the Golang relayer team wants to make it like really accessible so that it really doesn't take a lot of time for you to like spin up your relayer and essentially start relaying. Another thing is also that to submit the messages, you need to have your wallet funded. So that's also one of the steps that you would have to do is either on testnet, get some testnet tokens, or if it's on mainnet, actually have your wallet funded.
So maybe walk me through a life cycle of an IBC transaction.
I don't know if we have any like picture that we can use for this, or do I just try to?
You can share your screen if you have something available.
I should have it somewhere here.
Yeah, I mean, no stress.
Let's see if we are allowed to do this.
Because I think that would be interesting to see from the transaction perspective, step by step.
Sadly, I do not have permission to share my screen.
Ah, okay. Wait, does it mean that I can give you permission? Maybe I can give you. Sorry, this is the stuff that you know, peering behind the curtain. Maybe
I
you
think
can.
it might be me actually.
Okay.
I have the settings put up for Zoom, but not for Google Meet. But anyway,
Okay.
I'm sure we can do it just by using my hands.
Yes.
So essentially, we have blockchain A on the left, blockchain B on the right. Sorry if it's like mixed up. But if a user wants to initiate, let's for example say a token transfer, which is still like the easiest thing to imagine. Want to send some tokens from chain A to chain B.
If you want to try, you might be able to share your screen now. You might have the permissions. Just give it a quick go.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really
okay.
on my side.
Cool. Sorry. Go ahead.
So the user wants to send some tokens. It initiates a transaction. what is initially being done is we submit the commitment to send over some tokens. A relayer is monitoring a channel which is present on a connection between two chains. If the relayer sees that there's a commitment to send some packets, by the way, also when the transaction is submitted, the tokens are escrowed, so they're locked up. If the relayer then sees the commitment, it can create a packet of that, combine it with the proof, send it over to chain B. On chain B, we have so-called a receive packet message. This is a message that the relayer submits to the destination chain, chain B. On this, when this message is submitted, essentially you have a callback. Some logic can be implemented for a token transfer. Obviously, if the proof checks out that the tokens were locked up on chain A, then it means that some vouchers, IBC vouchers, will be minted on the destination chain. At the same time, also a acknowledgement is being written, and this acknowledgement then is being picked up again by the relayer from chain B back to chain A. And then also there is a possibility to do some logic that executes on the acknowledgement. So that's for a positive one. And then you also have the timeout situation, which is when, for some reason, we don't know what this may be, the receive packet message is not being submitted by the relayer, or at least not in the time frame that is being set out by the timeout parameter. And if that happens, we can actually, instead of querying for the proof that something was submitted on chain A, we can query for the proof of non-membership, it's called. So that's actually proving that it was not submitted. And if we have proof that it's not submitted, then we can put this information back to chain A, and then people can unlock their tokens because the IBC vouchers were never minted on chain B.
Cool. So obviously, you know, this whole the actual production functionality of this launched relatively recently. What are the next steps? What are the next releases that we can expect?
Yeah, so maybe let's look a little bit more into the history. So when IBC went live, that was April of last year. We only had ICS20, so token transfer. That was the first one. It's an important one. I think then in January this year, or in February, it was actually very closely around the time I started. We developed Interchain accounts. What Interchain accounts does is it basically enables you to control an account on a particular host chain, as we call it, by a module on the controller chain. So what you need to imagine is essentially that you have some chain where you're executing some logic with an application, and you want to use some kind of functionality on another chain, the host chain. And actually, what is interesting here is that you can do that in your flow, where the chain actually packages a transaction to be executed on the host chain, sends this over IBC after a channel has been initialized, and then it can kind of use this functionality as you would use an API in regular web development. That's one that we have.
Yeah, we actually in the chat with Sunny, he was, I think Simon was asking what is a really interesting use case of this, and Sunny was saying, like, for example, you could be deploying front end stuff on Akash, but like from one chain to the other. So you can have verified releases of front end, for example, right? And I think there are lots of really interesting cases. Is there something that you've come across use case wise for Interchain accounts where you're like, wow, we didn't even think about that in the beginning, that's really cool?
Actually, it's going a little bit slowly. I'm actually also giving a presentation on Friday about Interchain accounts, just because we have the idea that teams don't necessarily know how to really use it. Also, there might be some confusion about the naming, so maybe let's emphasize this once more. is that interchain accounts is not so much that I have an account on chain A and I want to use my account on chain A to control an account on chain B, because I have to like pay for extra fees. And so it would make more sense to have like a multi-chain front end where I can just directly submit to any particular chain. It's really that, you know, a module on a chain or a chain itself, if you want to see it this way, controls an account on another chain and really kind of like uses it like an API.
And this was Sanik's example that you could use governance on one chain, and you know, from the module of that chain, you could deploy front end
exactly
through through the account that the chain has, basically, right? So a chain or a module can have an account on another chain. Yeah.
I mean, this is maybe like my personal preference, but I've also heard the example of regions. So, for example, governance or a community pool on one particular chain, for example, the hub, would control an interchain account on a region network, which is basically a blockchain that controls like carbon certificates or whatever it's called. But yeah, I think those things are really cool, that, you know, your governance or your community pools like control some kind of account that can use some functionality that has some impact related or like real world value related accounts. That's always what I'm looking for. Not
I mean,
so much.
You could implement like automatic carbon offset for your chain, right? You could automatically, depending on what's happening on your chain, you could be buying voluntary carbon credits on regen automatically, that are then automatically taken out of circulation. Yeah.
Those are examples for, you know, I'm really excited about. And so yeah, this you know, we have token transfer, we have interchain accounts. We also have custom-made RBC applications, and actually, you know, together with B9, we're working on some content to actually add this to the academy as well, because I feel like, and maybe this is something that some of you can give some feedback on, is that the IBC part right now is kind of like theoretical, and we're hoping to like add some practical tutorials also, just to make it a little bit more tangible, maybe. But yeah, so developing these custom applications takes a little bit more time. Also, developers need to like onboard themselves on IBC. But for example, one promising example we've seen there is Band and Injective, who have worked on sending Oracle data over IBC. So basically, they have a chain that has a lot of Oracle data, and basically any other chain in the connected IBC ecosystem or Cosmos can use this Oracle data over IBC.
We just had a question from Pablo. He's asking, how does the IBC work for more application-specific transactions? Is this something that has to be first added to the protocol, like token transfer, or is there some generic transaction protocol description?
So if I understand your question correctly, interchain accounts, what we just discussed, is this more like generic transaction protocol, I would say. So basically, this is something that allows you to use functionality from any chain that is connected by IBC with the chain that you're on, and make sure that you can perform a transaction. If you really want to build custom IBC applications, so you first develop this module, and then you have to upload it onto the chain itself. Ideally, probably you would also have an ICS, means interchain standard, that outlines, you know, how your data needs to look like, how you need to encode your data, how you need to decode your data, so that, you know, obviously every chain who is implementing this particular application uses the same standards, and that you can use it on multiple chains, and not just, you know, if you and I are collaborating and we make our own custom version, it works in this particular way, but then when two other people on two other chains are collaborating, it works in another way that's kind of unuseful. So there's like, you know, the standardization of this. But you have to see like interchain accounts as a faster way to essentially use custom functionality that is native to another chain.
Do you know how Penumbra is going about their IBC integration? Do you know a little bit about that?
I haven't heard too much about that. So
Okay.
actually, maybe also nice to know is that the setup in our team, the IBC team at IG, is that we have, I think, 7 engineers, engineering manager, and then we have the product team. And I, as a DevRels, are kind of part of the product team, and I'm actually like very thankful for that, because focusing on IBC, just on the repo, on the code, on documentation, ecosystem, stuff like that. It's a lot, and we also have like product people who are looking more into competing protocols. We have people who are really like putting it out there and really making a lot more people aware of IBC, and especially that it's also possible to use IBC outside of the Cosmos ecosystem.
So if we're talking about like next things that are going to be that are in the works, or what does the roadmap look like for the next year or two?
So essentially, right now we just released, or actually need to have the final release of fee middleware. So fee middleware is essentially a way to incentivize relayers for the work that they did. So remember that I said
you were
that
saying fee middleware?
Mm-hmm.
Fee middleware, okay.
We call it fee middleware. It's ICS 29. You could also call it relayer incentivization.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it is applied as a middleware. So, for example, if you have an application, you just wrap some middleware around it, and then you're good to go, and you have enabled fees for this particular application. And if something were to go wrong, then the fees can just be disabled. So it's a very robust system. So that's basically important, because we need to find a way, if we want to have a sustainable ecosystem, to basically incentivize relayers on how to get paid for their efforts. There's a number of ways of how to do it. Maybe that's a little bit out of the scope, but I can probably send you like a link to an article I wrote about this, where we really go deep dive into what is possible. And for the next 2 years, I would say that when we have like token transfer, when we have interchain accounts, when we have middleware as well, you already have like a lot of building blocks for developers to use IBC. So I would say we're going to have some incremental development still, but at some point our work is going to be more about maintaining and supporting other teams to actually build with our tech. When we talk about custom IBC applications, this is mostly going to be work that other teams do, and we're very curious to see what people are going to build.
Cool. We had 2 questions. Keen is asking where are the funds to incentivize relays coming from?
That's what I was mentioning. So there's essentially like a few ways to do this. If you have fee middleware, what I was just talking about, it's essentially the end user or the module that allows to just put some fees, attach them to the packet. Right now, up until we had this fee middleware, essentially it was either chains directly funding relayers' wallets, relayers sometimes just funding out of pocket. We had some fee grant options, also some team delegation, basically engagements. So when a chain decides to basically delegate to relayer teams, because relayers are mostly today also validators, because the skill set that we have for those 2 audiences are very similar. So what we see is that those are pretty much the same people right now. So that's also a way to do it. And the future is going to point out what is going to be like the main way of incentivizing.
Timo, does that answer your question as well? I think it was. I think that's answered. Okay. No, I think that's interesting. So let's take a kind of a bit of a wider view. if everything that if everything in the IBC team, everything that everyone who's working at IBC, imagine everything works perfectly on schedule, exactly the way that it's supposed to go. It rolls out the way that it's supposed to. What's like the big, what's the big picture? How does this look like in 5 or 10 years? Yeah.
I think the big picture in 5 to 10 years is that we really have all of the main, I don't want to say ecosystems. I think the point is more the big types of consensus, because ultimately the challenge that we have with IBC is to develop light clients that can reason about the state of blockchains that have another consensus type, right? And light client development does take a while. For example, we now have a light client implementation that is pretty much done for Cosmos SDK chains and substrate chains. So those can be connected over IBC in the very near future. Also, a similar thing is being done for Near. So I think best case scenario in 5 to 10 years, we have all of these lifeline implementations and also the implementations of IBC transport layer, the IBC core modules available in each and every ecosystem and application framework, and hopefully also more standards. So I think right now we still have some competing ideas around interoperability, and I think that's a good competition to have, but probably we will see in the next 5 to 10 years. It's hard to like really pinpoint when exactly it's going to be, but probably there will be like one protocol that is the standard, and obviously we hope that this will become IBC.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a question from Simon. How does the IBC team think about cross-chain MEV, and are there any plans for encrypted relaying?
Someone just brought it up today in the team, and the answer was that we actually didn't think about it that much up until now. So yeah, but that's also, by the way, something I've noticed. Like when I first started the job, I had to do this project to basically understand the relays landscape a little bit better. And I thought I was going to like get all of the answers by talking to many people. But the reality is that even though, from my job, for example, day to day, IBC seems like, the mainstream already, it's probably not, and we're still like very, very early. So a lot of things will have to, still, it will have to become clear how exactly they're going to turn out. And so, for example, this cross-chain MEV thing, I think is definitely something we'll hear more and more people talk about. But for me, I really couldn't say.
And encrypted relaying in general?
I think also talks are ongoing, but nothing really that I've heard about for right now.
I think it's going to be interesting to watch what Penumbra is doing, Simon, on this, because they seem to be, obviously they're pushing the envelope. They have, I think they've already done their, so for everyone who doesn't know, Penumbra is basically, they are developing a completely shielded DEX using their own zero knowledge proof implementations. I spoke to Henry, he explained it to me, and kind of left me a bit wide-eyed, because I understand basically what they're doing, but when it's about actual implementation, it's still blowing my mind. I have no idea how that actually works. But very impressive work, and because they are IBC compatible, or they're going to be when they're launching. And as far as I understand, there might be some effort coming out of that corner. Obviously, they're building privacy tech, so I can imagine seeing that. The other thing, maybe NIM, but then they already have their own, obviously their own kind of infrastructure layer. So I don't know, but I think it would be interesting to keep an eye on what Penumbra does on the IBC front. All right. Am I back? Yes. There we go.
In the meantime, I also dropped the article I was referring to. And in general, I would also encourage people to follow the Interchain IO Medium blog post, because we are now like really ramping up and like trying to write more and more pieces about IBC just to get the knowledge out there. So this is definitely a good place to check for also things like cross-chain MEV. If we do some research about this, this will definitely be the place where it gets uploaded.
Cool. All right. Are there any other questions about anything that we talked about? There we go. Is the IBC presentation you did recently, is that public somewhere?
The one I did a couple of weeks ago, no. The one I'm going to do on Friday should be. It's called Nebular Paris. I think the website is really called nebular.paris. So if you check on next week, Monday, hopefully the presentation will be live.
Cool. Also, if you are at Nebula in Paris, you should go find Thomas. You should go find me.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Nebula.paris. And I assume that they'll have live streams, so you should be able to watch the presentation that Thomas is doing. All right. Cool. Maybe let's leave it with like a final word of advice. Obviously, we've got many different people in the Interchain Developer Academy, different levels of experience, and they are going to have different paths. What would you give as a piece of advice for them once they finish their program?
I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think my best advice that I can give you is like really take your own skills, your own knowledge, and what you bring to the table, and really take it from maybe Web 2 to Web 3. Because I really think unless you really want to go like really deep down the specifics of blockchain and distributed systems, that probably what we can really use is like a lot of Web 2 skills. Because ultimately in the background, blockchain architecture will be quite different than traditional web dev. But I think the interfaces with the regular user will be quite similar. So I think we actually could really use people who bring this knowledge about design, about user experience from the Web 2 world to the Web 3 world. So definitely, it can be a little bit intimidating to enter the blockchain space. I would say try to like put that aside, because even for someone who is now working in it, it's still quite intimidating. Like I said in the beginning, you will still have to learn. So really, be confident in yourself and what you bring to the table, and probably like really try to use that to your advantage. Don't just go with like the typical blockchain courses and focus on that. Really make it an advantage what you bring from your previous jobs. I think that would be like the main advice.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think also it's interesting because I think a lot of teams still have something to learn about like DevOps and testing and auditing and all of these things. I mean, Strangelove is developing an IBC testing framework, so those kind of things. But you can see, like, it's still pretty bare bones. It's still very early days, and all of this tooling is going to be needed. All of this experience is going to be needed, and kind of a professional approach to software development. Like, it's still a little bit Wild West. That doesn't mean that production software is not professional, but I think a more professional approach can definitely be valuable. So if you have experience building software professionally in some kind of regulated environment with certain sprints, with certain approaches, and it's definitely valuable bringing that.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Thomas, for taking the time, and thanks everyone for listening in, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.